Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. In this podcast, your host, Lori Amin, will interview published authors to chat about their work, journey to getting published, and their book recommendations. If you share a passion for books and always looking for your next read, then join us. Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. Today's guest is Richard Kirshenbaum. Richard is a published author of the book Rouge and novel Beauty and Rivalry. In this episode, Richard talks how his experience inspired him to write this book, his writing process, and of course, around the book recommendations. Now let's get to the show. Hi, Richard. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, Lori. How are you?
Great. So happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, let's see. Well, I am a ad man and now a novelist. So it's been a dream of mine to become a writer, and I would say that it's been nice to really achieve my goals. So I'm very happy to be here and talk with you.
Yeah. So how was your journey to start to writing a novel and just getting it published?
Well, I would say that one of the things that's really important, I think, for people who want to do it is to take the long view. I think what's really interesting is that, in terms of my career, I think that, everyone thinks that, things are supposed to happen overnight, or, you write the great American novel and, you hand it in and that's the way it goes. It doesn't work that way. I started out as a comedy writer when I was in my 20s, making $8 a joke for Joan Rivers. I then became an advertising copywriter for the business and did campaigns for many years and ran an agency. Then I, started, writing, different kinds of books and articles and, some theater work. And then, over time, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was asked to do a column in the New York Observer, and I came up with this idea of writing a column about rich people called Isn't That Rich? And Life Among the 1%. And the column really took off, and then that got sold to ABC, and then it got the attention of a lot of notable people like Liz Smith. And then that's when, I sort of built up to getting a real book deal, to, do the novel. But again, it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and things don't happen overnight. I'm not an overnight success in this.
Yeah, I think that's a perception that everyone's an overnight success, like what we see, who hits the New York Times bestsellers, who do this. And the reality is that it takes a lot of work, and it's a crooked path. It's not a linear path. It doesn't just happen. You just wrote a book and then you get published. Like there might be some setbacks. There might be some diversions. There might be some things that you do that will lead you to get to that place.
Yes. You're 100% right. But the journey, life is all about the journey. And quite frankly, one of the things about getting a little older, there are some benefits, not many, but there are some. And that's that you have, life experiences are richer. You can write from a deeper level of authenticity, having experienced, life's ups and downs. And I think that, so much of that is important to the authenticity of the characters and how that, how that works. So I would say that over time, if you can access that into your writing, it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So let's talk about your writing. Do you follow an outline, or do you see where the story leads you?
Well, I think, do I follow an outline or truthfully, I learned a great lesson in writing Rouge. I mean, first of all, here's the best way to do it. I started with I think the best way to do it is start with an overall macro big idea. And then from there, it's important to create, the characters. And if you create strong characters, and here's my lesson, and a plot line, the characters then, in a certain sense, if they're strong characters, they will write the book for you because the characters, if they're strong characters, will do certain things based on, their personalities. And so, if you create a strong enough character, the characters then in many ways write the book.
Yeah, I believe that's a big case from the books that I read, where the character is the one driving. Especially character-driven stories where there's a lot of depth around the characters that lets you to know what the story is going to look like or what the arcs are. So I can see that looking at it from that perspective seemed to be an easier way to write a story.
Yes.
So how do you organize yourself as a writer? How do you keep track of the ideas, inspirations, and characters?
I think, inspiration, first of all, they say write what you know.
Yeah.
And I think when you write what you know, I think it's a really good rule of thumb. It's much more authentic, and you can bring much more to it if you write what you know. So, as an ad man, I handled for many years many cosmetic accounts. So I handled the Revlon account, I handled the Avon account, I handled John Frieda and Biore, and a hair relaxer account called Cream of Nature. So, for me, when I started writing about these women and the cosmetic industry, I know the industry, and I know, I've worked with very well-known women in my career. Everyone from, Andrea Jung, who ran Avon, to Martha Stewart, and Elaine Wynn, who, with her husband, really ran Las Vegas and many, for years. So, I was able to not only, understand the psychology behind really powerful women and entrepreneurs, but also really understand the category. And so I think that, I was surprised that nobody had written a novel about the cosmetic industry and the founders of the cosmetic industry, and it is a based-on novel. So that was a pretty good guide, and experience really helped, in developing the plot in the book, and as it all came to fruition. So I would say again, everyone has unique experiences. Everybody's from somewhere different. Everybody is from a different culture. So if you can tap into what makes it unusual about you or your experience, then it's going to be richer.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest case. It shows that you're not about cosmetics. It showed in the book that there's something that it's reflected in the story. So it's great to hear that you do have the experience, and that's what it reflected back into the book.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
So do you share your work along the way, or do you wait until it's completed for others to read?
Let's see. Do I show my work to people? What I would say is that I definitely bounce the idea and the work off my wife, Dana, who I consider, my muse. I mean, definitely, she, when I started writing my first column, the Isn't That Rich column for The Observer, she gave me some comments and notes that were pretty harsh, and, wanted me to go back and do some rewriting. And I think, she, really motivated me. Not everybody wants the criticism, but, if someone tells you, yeah, I really like that, but you really could, Richard, that could be better. Like, you could write it in a better style. Those are the things that sometimes people need to hear. So I always think it's important to show your work to people. My editor at St. Martin's Press, Elizabeth Beyer, I mean, she was just incredible. She called me one day and she said, I just really I want a scene I want these characters to kind of meet, and I need a little bit more interaction. And one of the best scenes in the book, I think, came from her saying, we need that, and it's where the characters meet in, they're coming out of, a dressing room again, getting couture fitted for gowns, and they meet in the dressing room, and, the fireworks go off. So, I mean, I definitely attribute that scene in the book to Elizabeth, and, if I probably wouldn't have written that unless she gave me those cues.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, that was a powerful scene because the characters were living parallels, but then there's a moment where they connect, and there's the rivalry shows up. So that was a really powerful scene. So I love that it was inspired by somebody else. That was great.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about Rouge. So Rouge is a fictionalized version of the feud between beauty icons of Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden. What inspired you to dive into this story as opposed to other cosmetic, related stories?
Well, I think, when I was writing Rouge, I really went back and looked at all the great beauty icons, I looked at, Helena Rubinstein, I looked at Elizabeth Arden, I looked at, Estee Lauder, I looked at Madam C.J. Walker, I looked at Charles Revson. I mean, I looked at, what I thought was interesting was that this was a category primarily built by women, the first multi-billion-dollar category at a time when women couldn't get loans. in the 1920s. So I thought that was fascinating. And I thought these women led fascinating lives, and very often their personal lives were, turbulent. There were men, but I think for the most part, Madam C.J. Walker was one of the first African American, millionaires. I think the first, actually, female millionaire in her community. And I think that, so I really drew inspiration from the greats. And, when you're doing a book like this, it's really a compilation character, so it's not specifically based on only one person, but for the most part, you draw different things from different people. So, and that's one of the things that's really wonderful about being able to create characters is that, and plot lines is that, you can make the character, like if the character, you want the character to do a certain thing, like in the book, Constance is the society woman, the society girl. But for whatever reason, she's the one who adopts the Avon, door-to-door model. And Josephine, who's, the European emigre escaping the Holocaust, she's the outsider, but she creates the prestige part of the business, the salon business. And so the tension in those two things also helped create a great rivalry, and it would have been too easy just to make Constance, the society girl who has the salon business, and Josephine, the outsider who creates the door-to-door business, the mass business. It just would have been too easy, And I think that the tension in that is what's interesting.
Yeah, the tension was it was palpable, and it was something that made the story drive. That it just gave you kind of like you wanted to know what's next, and you wanted to figure out how these two rivalries would come to blows. At the same time, who actually continue to build their prestige and build their companies. So it was definitely an interesting story that it just allowed me to get to know this world and get to know strong female protagonists, which is one of my favorite things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, both characters. Well, all three characters were strong female protagonists, who were savvy, who were smart, who were able to just kind of like finagle immense world, and then still set their own intention as a female leading a business.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So how much research did you conduct on, in terms of getting to, you mentioned that you have experience working in the cosmetic world, but this is historical fiction too. So how much research did you conduct between the two beauty icons, the feud, as well as the other players in the business?
Yeah. Research when you're doing a historical fiction is crucial. And thank God for Wiki and, for, the computer, in the olden days, we had to go to the New York Public Library and check out books and things like that. So it's easier today, but still there's an enormous amount of research that needs to be done. First of all, you have to understand, number one, how these people lived in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, what they ate, how they traveled, what technology they were using or not. And then you have to apply the timeline of history to it. And so, as an example, I remember one of the first scenes was, Constance getting, a drink with her brother, but then, there was prohibition, so they wouldn't have gone to a bar. They would have gone to a speakeasy. And so, if you don't know that, then it's not going to be authentic to the time period. So, again, there was an enormous amount of research that had to happen. You have to know when, if someone's in Europe in the 1930s, you have to know when, Germany invaded Poland and when they invaded France and then there's, the layered other parts of the book, I brought in the McCarthy era and then there's, enormous amounts of other types of research that needs to be done. One amazing thing was, we all know and have heard of the Cotton Club, and the Cotton Club was, one of the leading hotspots for, an African-American hotspots in New York. But, what I didn't know was that, which was, because it was segregated and, during that awful period, the African American performers did not mingle with the all white audience, and that was shocking to me when I read that. And so for the most part, I thought there are certain things that you read and you research and that really hit you over the head, and you think, wow, that's pretty interesting, and, that's not very pleasant. So, those are the things that I wanted to make sure were brought out in the book. I did not want people to think that, everything about this time period was glamorous or fun or easy. And, when you're writing about, LGBT issues and gender inequality and racism and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and McCarthyism and many of the things that were so difficult for so many people, you need to be real about it, and that's really hard. But if you don't have your research and you don't do your work, then, you can't write something that's authentic.
Yeah, it reflected history. Like, I'm a history major, and so it reflected the things that I knew about history. At the same time, it just reflected, then it wasn't like a pink cloud, like everything's fine, everything's great. Like, no, it reflected like the Holocaust, McCarthy, all the different things that happened, the LGBT rise, the gender inequality. That was something that was touching, that had some modern themes within a historical fiction.
Yeah, and I worked hard to do that. I thought that was important and wanted people to see, what it was like, during that time period and what the mores were, and how people had to react to that, and how they had to live their lives, and that and by the way, very many lives were ruined. Many lives, when you talk about the McCarthy era and many of the Hollywood screenwriters and actors and leading people in Hollywood, where lives were ruined, completely ruined, were completely over, by the hearings, and they couldn't find work, and so these are the things where we can't forget these things. We live in a turbulent time, but we can't forget history, because, unfortunately, also history has a way of repeating itself, and, you need to be vigilant about, letting people know about these things. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah, it was reflected. I'm grateful that it was. So I had a question. You dive into innovation within the makeup industry, and especially with the invention of mascara. So was that part real? Like, the mascara was invented in 1930s, 1940s, or was that something that's fictionalized?
No, I think, I did a lot of research on mascara, and, it's, one of the themes in the book is the race for the first mass market mascara. First of all, one of the things that I found fascinating was that, mascara has a very unusual level of interest, which also had to do with Egyptology. When King Tut's tomb was discovered in the 1920s, and they discovered sort of the black slashed eyes, on King Tut. It became coal, which was used, and that became sort of the rage, and so that there became an interest a little bit in mascara, and so also there were certain products that were on the market that unfortunately had lead in it, or there were things that, certain substances that were used that created certain levels of blindness. So we take it for granted today that these products are safe and that they're hypoallergenic and all these things. But, in those days, you could put whatever you wanted out on the market, and if it was, safe, it was safe, and if it wasn't, it wasn't, And so, and then, as it moved into the 20s and the 30s, there was a cake mascara. It was actually, like a lump of coal, it looked like a lump of coal, like a cake. And people would moisten it, and you would have a brush, and you'd put that on your eye. But the tube mascara with the brush, that was a technology that was developed later. And of course, it was, today when, women, can buy mascara and keep it in the bottom of their bag, and it's, mess free. And so there was a lot of things like clumping and mess that would staining on your hands. So the current products that we have today are much more, they're safe and ingenious in many ways. And in some ways, we take them for granted. But at the time, one must remember that this was not, readily available to everyone at the price.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was like realizing, I was like, that's probably, it didn't exist. It would come about the way we take things for granted. Once upon a time, there were brand new inventions. So that was a great, portrayal of an invention. That's something that I take for granted now in 2019. But the reality is that, 100 years ago, that did not existed. And then the process of just finding the right formula, the finding the right brush, that was something that was pretty unique about it.
Right.
So in this book, you portray three powerful women. How much work was it to get into these characters' mindset?
I've worked with many powerful women in my career, and having a bird's eye view and a front row seat to working with some of the great American female entrepreneurs. I'm the first generation of men to have worked for the first generation of female entrepreneurs. And, I see the drive and the ambition. And I once had lunch with the famous Tina Brown, and she once said to me something that really stuck with me. She said, "Women don't think they can have it all. They can, they just can't have it all at the same time." Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so fascinating because men don't think that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that I give it to women. I give homage and respect to women based on that. Let me repeat the part. I give a lot of great respect to women for having to do the balancing act, because I think that, like Tina said, it's harder in some ways when I've talked to, the female executives I work with, the balancing of family and work, they have told me, is a bit harder. So that's brought to the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's reflected. It reflected, the balance. How did they balance, work, motherhood, responsibilities, family relationships. So it was reflected in the story. So that was great. That was a great point of view that you brought in.
Thanks.
Now let's get to a round of book recommendations. This is an opportunity for you to share with our audience what they should read next. So what is your favorite genre?
I love biographies. I have to say that because truth is stranger than fiction. And so, again, it's not when you in the original question you asked me about research, when you're reading I could read something and it could spur something from some completely different person, Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's say I read the biography of Gloria Swanson, who was a great film star, Mm-hmm. She had a very interesting life, and was one of the most successful actresses, and she was, one of the first people to have a studio. And so, again, I might draw some inspiration from that, even though I'm not writing about a female, actress, but mm-hmm. I know that she lived during the same period, and, so, for example, what she wore and her fashion, some of those things, might be taken into Rouge as an example. Mm-hmm. So I really, really love reading biographies, and biographies really influence me.
That's great. Who's your favorite author? I
have to say that I love Truman Capote because mm-hmm. I think that he, his social observation and his wry sense of humor really always, when I reread the work, it's just incredible, and mm-hmm. He wrote things that really, set off people, and he was almost banished from society, mm-hmm. towards the end of his life because he wrote about his friends, many of whom were, prestigious people who became incensed that he wrote about them. And I don't think Truman thought at that time that he was doing anything wrong, but he did, and so he lost a lot of his friends along the way. And I think he just thought of himself as a great artist, but the truth is that, when you read Answered Prayers and you read that book again, and the frankness about his sexuality and his one of the characters in the book is a gigolo, and it's just it's so modern, it's so incredibly controversial, and so I'm sure when the book came out, which was in many ways based on his own life, I think it really it's so eye-opening and so incredibly fresh, so it stands the test of time. So I'm a huge Truman Capote fan.
I love it. What are your top 3 favorite books of all time?
Well, Answered Prayers, definitely. You know what I'm saying? And La Côte Basque, and within Answered Prayers is about the society, the ladies who lunch. It's probably the ultimate, book on that. I have to put The Great Gatsby as well because, it's really one of the finest American novels ever written. And, the way the story's told through the narrator, I mean, I think it's just incredible. And it's just finely honed, and crafted. And, I'll tell you something that other people might not say, but I have to tell you that when I first read The Other Side of Midnight by Sidney Sheldon, I just thought it was, a page turner. And so for me, the idea of writing something literary, but wanting people to not be able to put it down, I mean, I think that's incredible. So the idea is, can you mix the two? Can you have a really well-written book that people don't want to put down? And the reviews of Rouge have been that, and that's what I really am proud of.
Yeah, I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting. And usually for historical fiction, it takes me, I put it down, I go back, and this was, for me, Rouge was like a one-sitting book, which is line of a good book for me.
Thank you so much.
So what book have you read this year that you love?
Well, I read the biography of Gloria Swanson, and I have to say that, I was just struck by her life. I was struck by, that she was the highest paid performer in the world at one point, and that she had an affair with Joe Kennedy, who, really in many ways she thought was going to help her, and in many ways, ruined her financially, according to the book. And, it was just an incredible read. I mean, and her life story, and then how she came back in her 50s and won an Oscar for Sunset Boulevard. I mean, again, it's a triumph for, I'm really attracted to strong characters, and she was real. So, quite beautiful, but also so talented. So I just loved reading that book. I thought it summed up the 20s for me, and, Hollywood and the, golden age of Hollywood. And it was just incredible.
That's awesome. Tell us where we can find you online.
You can find me online at, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and on Instagram at Richard_Kirshenbaum, Kirshenbaum. I know it's a long name. It actually means cherry tree in German, so I'm actually Mr. Cherry Tree Kirshenbaum. And yeah, I mean, I sort of been really enjoying, interacting with people who like the book, and look forward to, continuing my writing.
Thank you so much for being in the show.
I really appreciate your having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard, for a great interview. For show notes and a list of books mentioned in this podcast, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back this Thursday with an author interview.